JavaScript's this keyword has confused developers for decades. You make a small mistake and boom, things won't work for you. Or even worse, that it will give you some unexpected result. You will end up debugging for entire day to figure out what exactly went wrong. However, once you understand the internal fundamental concept behind the famous this keyword, it is going to unlock a different level of JavaScript mastery for you. Stick around, folks, because today we are going to make it crystal clear for you. Hey, this is Tapas. Welcome back to the day 13 of 40 Days of JavaScript, the initiative to make you professional, make you comfortable with JavaScript fundamentally and practically. In today's video, we are not only going to cover about this keyword with a lot of examples, we are also going to take some tricky questions towards the end and answer them with all the fundamentals that you'll be learning. And after that, I'm going to talk about the task that I'm leaving for you so that you can get a greater grip on JavaScript's this keyword. Please show your support by subscribing to tapaScript because it means a lot after putting this hard work to bring the quality content in front of you. All right, let's get started. JavaScript's this keyword is like that one friend who love to change sides in an argument. Sometimes the friend will be in his side and the next point the friend will be in her side. In case of this also, you will find that it is referring to an object. Next moment, it is referring to something called undefined. Or again, next moment is referring to the window object. What's going on? So idea here is to break it down to the extent that you will understand in which situation this is referring to what and why exactly it is referring in this way without taking it in a way that, oh, this is not working correctly or this is misbehaving. So let's get started with some of the core example in understanding this. This is a keyword in JavaScript, and the main purpose or the existence of this keyword in JavaScript so that it can help us understand what exactly happening in a particular execution context. And when we say this, the literal meaning of this means we are pointing to something. Okay, this is it, or this is the thing, correct? So in the programming, JavaScript programming context, when we say this, we try to understand currently in which context of a particular object we are in and we are executing or my programming is running. So that's the whole purpose of this keyword in JavaScript. With the value of it, with the value of this keyword, you can determine that under which context you are in right now, and based on that you can take your call, you can do your business logic, you can implement things accordingly. All confusions about this pointing to an object, this pointing to undefined, or this pointing to something else, for example window object, is based on where exactly this is used, but not about where exactly this is placed, but on the execution time of your code where exactly this is used. So that's what we are going to see. Remember, when you load a piece of JavaScript code, forget about piece of JavaScript code, even a blank JavaScript file into the JavaScript environment using your HTML or any other way, JavaScript creates something called global execution context. In the global execution context, we get two things. If you are running the JavaScript on the browser environment, we will get this keyword and the window object. If you're running on a server side, for example Node, you will get this keyword and the global object. In the global execution context, in the initial execution context, this keyword's value will be exactly equals to the window object value. It means that this is pointing to the window object. So if I try to do a console.log of printing this at the global level, I expect that this is going to give me the window object. Fair enough? This at the global is the window object. So we know, like in what situation this points to window object. If you are accessing the value of this at the global level, then this will be referring to the window object. But that's not all. There are many other situations based on which the value of this is going to be different. And this is exactly you need to understand that in what circumstances, what will be the value of this. If you understand those circumstances and if you are able to compute in your brain that in these circumstances, this value is going to be this particular value, that's all. That's all is about this keyword. This is where you will be mastering this keyword like anything. Now to get this better, we have to understand the rules of something called binding. So what does it mean, the binding? Who is binding what? Who is binding to where? This is what we're going to talk about. Now, whenever we're talking about this, apart from the global aspect, there are few other aspects that you have to keep in mind. One is the aspect of object, another is the aspect of function. To understand what is the exact value of this, you have to look for that where a particular function is called, where a particular function is invoked. If a particular function is having this in it, this keyword in it, you have to first look for where exactly that function invoked. If you understand where exactly that function is invoked or called, you will be able to identify the value of this very clearly. Let's understand that with few examples. Let's take the example of inside of an object. Let us create an object const employee. Let's add few properties to it. Say id, we'll add a first name, and after that let's add a last name. We know that an object can also have a method, so let's create a method, return this. The method is nothing but the function inside the object as a value of a property, and from here we will do return this. How are you going to access the properties from this object? Of course, I can do console.log of employee id as employee.id, and this is going to give me the employee id value. Now what if I do like console dot log of, I'm interested in this particular this keyword's value inside this object. So this inside the employee object, I can do employee dot calling this method return this. So this return this method is going to return this, and this is going to output the value of this keyword. Coming back to the console, I can see the employee id had printed as expected. However, this inside the employee object, the value is now referring to the same object itself. Are you seeing this? The value is referring to the same object, same employee object. First name Alex, last name B, ID, and it also has a method inside it, which is called return this. Just remember this, when we invoke a method of an object, how do we invoke the method of an object? We invoke the method of an object using this dot notation. We know that. So when we invoke a method of an object, this keyword is bound to the object on which we have invoked the method. A rule that you need to remember. Let me tell it again. When we invoke a method on an object, the context of this or the value of this is bound to the object on which we have invoked the method. So here we have done employee dot return this. Return this is a method, and this return this is invoked on the employee object. So that means that this keyword's value or the context of this will be bound to this particular employee object, and this is what is having another name which we call as implicit binding. Okay, so anyone ask you what is an implicit binding, you have to tell in this way. Implicit binding is a way in which you understand that if a method is called on an object using the dot notation, the context of this is bound or associated to the object on which we have invoked the method. And this is what is an example. If we have to take out id, we'll be doing employee.id. If we have to take out first name, we'll be doing employee.firstname. Now, as this is bound to this particular object, or this is referring to this particular object, it means that I can now do a this dot id to get the id. I can do a this dot first name to get the first name. I can do a this dot last name to get the last name, right? I can do that because now this and employee are pointing to the same thing, because this is what the implicit binding gave it to us. So it means I can now create another method over here, say get full name, and what this method can do, it can basically return this dot first name space this dot last name, isn't it? So if I now invoke this particular method over here, let's say employee dot get full name, what will happen? Get full name is a method, and I'm invoking it on the employee object using the dot notation. So it means I am trying to get an implicit binding. As per the rule of implicit binding, if I'm using this keyword inside this particular method, this will be bound to this particular object itself, the employee object itself. So if this is bound to the employee object, that means this is now referring to the employee object. So if I do this dot first name, it is equivalent of doing employee dot first name, which is Alex. If I am doing this dot last name, it is equivalent of doing employee dot last name, which is B. That means this function is going to return me the value Alex space B. If I put that in a console.log to check that constructed full name using this employee.get full name, I'll get that constructed full name using this is Alex space B. So now if you are looking into the code of this fashion, you know very clearly what this refers to. Whenever you are seeing this inside an object method, and if this particular method is called using the object dot this particular method name, by closing you can say this keyword is now bound to that object on which this particular method is invoked. This is what is called implicit binding. Please remember this, because most of the cases you will see the examples which are related to implicit binding, you will be able to answer them very quickly. Now let's take one more example, a little complex one. Let us create two objects. One is called Tom object. I love Tom and Jerry cartoon, so again and again I take the reference of this, and it has a property called Tom, and then let's say Tom's age is 7, and now let's create one more called Jerry, the another character in the Tom and Jerry cartoon. And here also we'll have name and age. Name is Jerry, age is 3. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create one function for you. The function will be greet me, and this function takes an object. Okay, any object it can take. Now as it is an object, we know that we can add a new property to this, right? And the property value can be a function. So in object, when a property's value is a function, we call that as a method. We learned that. Now for this particular object obj, I can now create a new property called log message, and then can assign a method to this particular property. And here I am going to print a console.log saying dollar this dot name is dollar this dot age, and then we'll say years old. Okay, so what I have done, I have created an object called Tom which has name and age. I have created another object called Jerry which has same name and age with different values, and then a greet me method. The greet me method takes an object, and on this I have added a new property and assigned a function which we call method to this particular property, and printing a console.log saying that this dot name is this dot age years old. Now here the twist. If you just see this guy, greet me, and let me call greet me. So greet me I'm calling over here. I have to pass an object, I know, that's great. Now whenever you are calling greet me and you are passing this particular object, looking into this greet me, you have no idea what this keyword is referring to, isn't it? Can you tell me at this stage, when you're looking into line number 43, what is this keyword's value? You cannot. So if we have to determine in this case what is the value of this keyword, it all depends on what exactly this particular object is referring to. Now if I don't pass anything, any object over here, of course this is going to be undefined, and this is going to invoke undefined.log message, and it is going to give me an error that you cannot add log message a property to something called undefined. Great, that is the thing we are not going ahead with. So I pass Tom over here. The Tom is nothing but this object that I have created over here. Now what will happen? Tom will get passed as an object. Now Tom already had name and age. There will be a new property now gets added called log message, and then a function gets associated with it. So at this stage, what will be the structure of Tom? If I have to just do a console.log of obj here to print out the structure of it, The moment I call greet me Tom, Tom goes over there. Tom had name and age, and we have added one more property called log message. And if I'm printing it here, I will get what is the new shape of the Tom object. So the new shape of the Tom object is it has name, age, and then a method called log message. Correct? Now I can invoke tom.name to get Tom's name. I can get tom.age to Tom's age. I can get tom.log message to execute this particular method, isn't it? This is the object's way of working. So of course I can do tom.log message. Now when I do tom.log message, what exactly happens? That means this particular log message will be invoked in the context of what? This particular Tom object. What is this keyword will be referring to? As per the rule of implicit binding, if I am calling a method using the dot notation on an object, and if that particular method is having this keyword will be referring to the object on which we are calling this method. So the object here is Tom, so it means that in this case this will be referring to the Tom object. As this is referring to the Tom object having name and age. So here, this is referring to the Tom object. So Tom object's name is Tom, the value, and Tom object's age is 7. So when we are doing tom.log message, I'll be getting Tom is 7 years old. I'm getting Tom is 7 years old. Now, if I just change the reference, changing the reference in the sense, instead of Tom, I will now change the object reference to Jerry. Jerry dot log message, what you think will be the output? Now we are invoking the log message in the context of the object Jerry. So the this inside the log message will be now pointing to the Jerry object. So this dot name will be Jerry, this dot age will be 3. Now the output will be that Jerry is 3 years old. Okay, Jerry is 3 years old. So I hope this implicit binding matter is crystal clear to you. Just remember that whenever you see such things happening and your method is having a this is always referring to the object on which you are invoking the method. So that is how you should be answering what is the value of this. Looking into where this is positioned inside your function, don't try to get the value of the this. Always look for where exactly this function is being used or invoked or called. If you can look into its caller, like where it is getting called or the invocation point, then you apply your logic of implicit binding. Okay, here one implicit binding happening because we are doing object dot this method, and this method is having this. So that means the object on which I'm invoking the method, that is what this is referring to. That means in this case, this is Tom. This dot name, if Tom is having a name, is this particular value. If Tom is not having name, it will be undefined. As simple as that. This is how this keyword works with object. There is no other rule, there is no other funda. Please keep implicit binding inside your brain, and if that happens, you have learned a great part of this keyword already. Now we are moving into the next item. As you understood about this keyword in the context of an object, especially the object methods, let us understand what happened to this keyword and its value when we are dealing with a function that is not part of an object. Basically, that is not a method. It's a standalone outside function. What happened then? Let's create a function called sayName. And inside sayName, I have provided a console.log says this inside a function and printing this. And if I invoke sayName over here, what do you think will be the output? What is the value of this keyword over here? Let's check it out. So you see the value of this keyword inside a function is referring to the window object again. So it seems that this keyword is not at all bound to this sayName function at all. The sayName function is declared in the global scope, in the global execution context, because this sayName function is not inside any other function. It is declared into the global scope. So look like this keyword in this case is not referring to this particular function at all. Rather, it is going to its outer scope. Outer scope is what? Is the global scope, where we knew in the beginning itself the value of the this is an window object, correct? And here also we found the value of the this is an window object. So it seems it is not referring to this function, but it is going to the outside of its scope, its parent scope, which is a global, and it is referring over there. You may think like this. Okay. If that is the case, let us create a nested function. We all know what is nested function. So I'll create a function, say outer, and let's pass a parameter called a. And here if I give a console.log saying that this is inside an outer function, and this one exactly same as this one. So if I'm executing outer, I'm for sure know that this will be referring to the window object. So there is no surprise here. Now let's create another function called inner, and let's pass another parameter called b. And here also I'm going to take the same console.log and I'm going to put it over here. Let me return this function. So this is like a closure from here. Now I can call over here const outer result equals to outer, takes a parameter, so let's pass an argument. As this is returning this function, that means this particular function will be returned, which is like the inner function. So here I'll be invoking outer result. Let's pass 3. Okay. So in this line, I have invoked the outer function. The console.log and the this will be referring to the window object. We know from this, we have seen. Now in this line, this outer has returned this particular inner function. What will be the value of this keyword over here? Because this is a line will be getting executed over here. What will be the value of this? Previously, we thought that this is referring to the outer scope. That's why this was window object, because outer scope was the global scope. Now, in this case, the outer scope of inner is this outer function. So in this case, this is going to refer to outer function, or it is going to refer to something else? That is the question. Instead of outer, we'll call it as inner over here. It is not outer. So now let's see the output. It says this inside an outer function. Okay, this is expected. No worries. But this inside an inner function is also pointing to the window object. Now that means it is not going by the philosophy that we thought initially, that for function this always points to the outer scope. It is not happening this way. Look like this is always pointing to the window object, irrespective of wherever you have declared this particular function, whether it's an outer function declared in the global scope or an inner function declared inside an outer function scope. It doesn't matter. Yes, that is the case. Now, there is one more thing in JavaScript. It's called strict mode. Strict mode is a mode to determine or to make sure that the code that you are writing is adhering to some of the core philosophies of JavaScript, and your code doesn't end up with so many mistakes at the end point of time. So when you run your JavaScript code in the strict mode, the behavior of your output, the JavaScript code output, may differ, because in strict mode, JavaScript may not allow certain things to happen. Now, to run your code in the strict mode, what you have to do, you have to come to your JavaScript file. At the top of the file, you just write this called use, then strict, strict, and then end with a semicolon. This is the strict mode. Now, when you are running your JavaScript in the strict mode, the way that I am doing right now, it doesn't really allow, JavaScript doesn't really allow this keyword to refer to the window object when it is used inside a standalone function, irrespective of it is an outer function or inner function. It is straight away going to say it is undefined, so that you don't have any such confusion that we were confused with, that as this is pointing to the window object, look like in this case, standalone function case, this is always going to go to the outer scope of this function, and then it will be pointing to that. As JavaScript don't want you to get into that kind of confusion, it will always mark this as undefined, or this value as undefined, whenever you are using this inside a plain old JavaScript standalone function. Now if I see the output, I can see this inside a function is undefined, this inside the outer function is undefined, this inside a inner function is also undefined. All right. So you will be running your JavaScript in most of the cases in the real world in the strict mode. In that case, you have to make sure that you understand if you're using this inside a standalone plain old JavaScript function, the value of this is undefined. I told you in the beginning itself that this keyword in JavaScript is like your that friend who won't be in one side, who will be always in a multiple side, sometime in your side, sometime in his side, sometime in her side. This keyword is also like that. Based on where you have used this keyword, the value of this keyword will be determined. So you learned about the implicit binding, you learned about the this inside a standalone function. Now you know to determine in two ways what will be the value of this, irrespective of whatever comes in your way, what kind of problem an interviewer asks, you will be able to answer with these two mechanisms that I have taught you. But that's not all. There are much more that you have to understand. And please take note, write these rules in the progress tracker that I've shared with you, because once you go back to this rule any point in time and see this example that I'm teaching you, you will find this very easy and crystal clear to you. So far so good, but how about arrow functions, guys? We also have something called arrow function, right? We can write a function like const get food equals to, with the arrow syntax, we can return something from here. Let's return this. So now if I do get food, what will be the value of get food? Let's do it with the console.log. So now this inside the arrow function defined in global scope saying get food. Why am I emphasizing on the fact defined in global scope? Why? Because get food is of course not inside any other function, not inside any other object. So it is defined in the global scope. And I am now interested to see what get food returns. Get food returns this. So what will be the value of this? This inside the arrow function defined in global scope, again pointing to the window object. But hold on. One thing did you notice? I'm still running my code in the strict mode using the use strict. That is the reason I'm still seeing undefined when this was used inside function. When it is not running in strict mode, this was also referring to the window object. But as I'm running in strict mode now, for the standalone JavaScript function, it is giving undefined, but for arrow function, it is still giving the window object. What does it mean? So now, is our previous assumption back again? Does it mean that this keyword inside the arrow function is always bound to the context of the parent scope of where you have defined the arrow function? Yes, that's the right assumption to have. So for arrow function, it doesn't have its own this. It means that if you have usage of this keyword inside an arrow function, how this keyword will be resolved is always by where exactly your arrow function is placed, means its lexical scope, and you have to see what is there in the surrounding. The surrounding of this particular get food function, where it is placed, is the global object, is the global scope. Now in the global scope, this is window. That is where this is referring to the window. Now hope this is very clear. So the regular standalone function versus an arrow function, this keyword differs. For regular standalone function, this will resolve to undefined if you're running in strict mode, or it will point to the window object if you're running in the non-strict mode. Okay, most of the cases you'll be running your code in the strict mode. So in most of the cases, for a standalone JavaScript non-arrow function, this will resolve to undefined if you're using inside a function. But for arrow function, it always depends on where you have defined that arrow function and what is surrounding to it. In this case, the surrounding of get food is the global scope. So this will refer to the global scope, this, which is what? Window object. So that is why it is window object over here. Now let's start making things complicated for you so that you understand with this complexity. Let's create an object called food. Inside that object, I'll have a name. Again, my favorite food called mango. And the color of this food is of course yellow. Now at this stage, let's create one method over here, get description. And this particular method is an arrow function than a regular function, which return this particular string. Say this dot name is dollar this dot color. Fair enough? And then after that, I'm going to do console.log of food.getDescription, this particular method. Now, with all the explanation so far, let me know what will be the output over here. So let's iterate. Food.getDescription is this particular method. Here I have used this, but this line is inside an arrow function. Arrow function is defined where? Arrow function is defined over here. Lexically, it is placed at the line number 85 and it is inside this particular block. So what will be the output and why? Let's go by the logic. This is placed inside this block. We know arrow function doesn't have its own this. This is always connected to the parent scope of the place where we have defined this arrow function. We have defined this arrow function inside this object. What is the parent of this object is again the global, right? Because the food object is defined in the global scope. So as the parent is in global, that means this will again refer to the window object. Now on window object, do I have name? On window object, do I have color? No, I don't have it. So it is going to give me an undefined. So this dot color will be definitely an undefined. That is the output I'm going to get. So I hope you guys are getting it, right? Get description lexically placed inside this block, which is an object. Get description doesn't have its own this. So in this case, it is an arrow function. So this will be bound to wherever this particular arrow function is lexically placed, that particular scope's parent. This particular scope is this block scope. Its parent is what? Is the global scope. That means this is now referring to the window object again. So I expected an output saying that this dot name mango is this dot color yellow. It is not giving me that output because this dot name and this dot color are undefined. Very unfortunate. How are you going to fix this? What are the different ways we know we can fix this? So one way that you can tell that we can fix this is, instead of using arrow function over here, I can use get description colon a regular function, which is a method for object. And from here, I can return this one. Will this fix it? Let's go by our rule. So we are doing a food dot get description. We will first see what is get description. Get description is a method and this is not an arrow function. So here implicit binding is going to happen, which was our previous case that we have learned. In case of implicit binding, if it is not an arrow function, now we know for a regular function, if the function is having this will always be bound to the object on which we are calling this particular method. So in this case, it is food. Food is having name and color. So this will be referring to food. Food dot name will have mango. Food dot color will be the yellow. So mango is yellow is what I'll be expecting. So this is one way it should work. Let's see the output. I can see mango is yellow, this particular output. So coming back to the rule book again, I hope you're taking down the notes. Whenever you are seeing such notation in the beginning, in the Tom and Jerry case, or even before that, this employee case, I have taught you that how implicit binding works. Now, along with the implicit binding, just seeing the method here itself, don't try to give the answer. See if this particular method was declared as a regular JavaScript function or it was declared as an arrow function. If it is an arrow function, you have to apply the arrow function's logic. You have to check where exactly this arrow function is defined, and then you have to go to the parent scope of that particular place and see whether there you can resolve the name and color. If you can't, then it is undefined. If it is not an arrow function, if it is a normal function, then you will go with I closing that now this is going to refer to the object on which we have invoked this method. And if that object is having name and color, it will resolve the name and color, otherwise it will give undefined again. And the third thing that you have learned so far is like if this function is not inside an object, if it is standalone, in that case, this is always undefined if you're running on strict mode. You have learned this much. So many rules. Please write these rules because this is going to be very, very useful for you in the coming days. Now, the last twist about this. If I come back and tell that, hey, you have fixed this, great. But can you fix this one using an arrow function itself? Now, this portion alone, if you understand it well, you have mastered this like anything. Okay. So I'm giving you a task. The task is, I am not taking this particular fix from you. I'm not happy with this fix. I want to use the arrow function only. But my condition is you have to make sure that it prints mango is yellow. I have used the arrow function before, so I'm copying this guy once again over here. But here I didn't get the output, desired output, because here get description is lexically defined inside this particular object, this block, and the parent of this block is the global object. So this was referring to window where name and color was not defined. So mango is yellow was not printing. So how am I going to fix this with an arrow function? What is your thought? Now in these situations, what you have to do, you have to always think from the scope perspective and the formula, the rule perspective. The rule says whenever you are using arrow function, you have to first see lexically where it is defined. Lexically right now it is defined inside this block. Excellent. Now if it is lexically defined inside this block, that means it is always going to the parent of this block. Parent of this block is the global. So if I have to print mango is yellow, somehow I have to refer this keyword to this food, isn't it? But with using arrow function, that is a challenge. But I have to refer this to food. That is the only way I can print food.name mango is yellow. Now to do that, what I can do, I can play with the scope. I can put the scope of this guy, the arrow function guy, one level down. Think in this way. I can put the scope of this arrow function one level down so that whenever it is coming to its parent scope, instead of going to the window, instead of going to the global, it comes to this object. Then my problem will be solved, just like mathematics. So for doing that, I can now do something like, I can create a function over here, and then inside this function, I can keep my arrow function. Now what will happen? Now, whenever I'm calling this get description, this guy is going to get returned from here with this return statement. Now, when this guy is getting returned from here, get description is returning this arrow function. Now, JavaScript will check where exactly this arrow function was defined. This arrow function was lexically placed at the line number 90. So it is defined in the scope of this particular function. Arrow function doesn't have its own this. The formula here, wherever it is lexically defined, whatever the scope it is lexically defined, it will go to its parent scope and try to resolve whether this name and color is there or not, because that is where it will be referring to. Great. So this is lexically placed at the line number 90. And it is in this particular function scope. Arrow function doesn't have this. So it will go to its parent scope. Which is the parent scope? Now the parent scope is this. Here now this is referring to now this object where I find name and color. So that means this is resolved to food. So food.name will be mango, food.color is yellow. Now this is going to return mango is yellow. Do you see? If you know the formula, if you know the rule, you can answer this keyword question in your sleep. This is what I'm trying to say, guys. It is really not difficult. It is just about you understand, think with a mental model, the way that we have been learning. Execution context, scope, closure, object, this, everything is connected in JavaScript. No one can teach you JavaScript in 1 hour. They are just bluffing. Mark my word. To learn JavaScript this deep once and never forget for lifetime, this is the way that you need to learn. I hope you understand that. So with the logic, with the rule itself right now, we are able to modify the expectation from this get description function in such a way it is going to return me the resolved value correctly. Okay. So you will be facing question like this a lot in your career. So please answer to them. So let me complete this one. Now this get description, whenever I am calling, what it is going to return? It is going to return me this particular function, correct? This particular arrow function. It return me, you see, this particular arrow function. But I need the resolve value of it, right? So what I have to do now, create a variable called desc function equals to assign the return value from this to this and take that desc function over here. It is a function. I will execute it. Now if I go back, I can see mango is yellow. This is where as well closure is also working hand in hand, isn't it? Because in this case, this keyword's value is closed even after the execution of get description. This is what we have learned in the closure session also. After the execution of the outer function also, the outer function's variables are accessible to the inner function because those are closed in the inner function. In this case, the outer function was this get description, this one. Even after its execution, later point of time, when we call the inner function which was returned from it, it still have the value closed, the this value closed, and that is the reason even in this line 94 we are seeing that this is referring to this particular food. This is how JavaScript works. Once you understand this concept, the concept of closure, the rules of this, life will be so easy. So before we go to the other bindings, understanding other bindings of this, those are comparatively much more straightforward. These are the crucial things that we have learned. Let me reiterate and revise for you once very quickly. With global scope, this always refer to the window object for browser environment, for node environment to the global object. Fair enough. For standalone function in strict mode, it always point to undefined. For non-strict mode, is point to the window object. For implicit binding, whenever you are calling the object name dot the method, you have to check what is that particular method is about. If the method is a standard JavaScript function, a non-arrow function, and if that function has the this keyword, the this keyword is bound to the object on which you are calling the function or the method. Simple. Okay. If that function happened to be an arrow function, whether it is inside an object or outside an object, wherever it is, it all depends where the arrow function is lexically placed, defined in your code. Check the parent scope of the place where arrow function is defined, because arrow function doesn't have its own this. The this always refer for an arrow function to the parent scope of the scope where arrow function is defined. So in our example, we have seen in the food example, when we did first time get description over here, that this was referring to the parent scope of the place where this arrow function was defined. The arrow function was defined inside this block. The parent scope was global. So this was pointing to global. Correct? In this case, what happened is like this is defined inside this function. It doesn't have its own this, and it will always go to the parent scope of the place where it is defined. So it is defined inside this function. Its parent scope is this. So here this will be referring to the food. That's why it is getting this dot name, this dot. So far all the logic clear. So far all the rules clear. I closing, you understand everything. Now we are going to learn about other methodology which is called explicit binding. There are three things we will understand and learn where this changes behavior again. One is using call, apply, and bind. Let's learn them as well. I hope you're enjoying it. If you do so, please like, comment, and please don't forget to subscribe. With implicit binding, the method which used the this keyword was inside this particular object. And another example, we had standalone objects that we were passing inside a function to attach a method to that object, and that's why the method was becoming the part of the object again, and it was resulting into implicit binding. But there is something called explicit binding. Explicit binding is binding your this keyword or the value of this to something which is very unrelated. Now we have learned that in JavaScript code there are multiple execution contexts, right? Now if you want to refer being in one execution context from any other execution context, and then you want to bind these two, that is where you will be using something called explicit binding. And the explicit binding can be achieved using three methods: call, apply, and bind, where the this keyword behaves in a different way than how we have seen with the implicit binding. Let's understand the first one called call method. Let's create two different things. For example, we'll start with a function called greeting. Let's have a console.log. Inside this greeting, which says hello, some this dot name belongs to this dot address. Very simple thing. Now let us have an object called user, which is having a name and address. Now these two things are completely disjoint, right? User has nothing to do with this function. This function has nothing to do with this user object. It means that user object doesn't have a property that is related to this particular function, or this function is also not taking user object as a parameter and binding this like we have seen in the implicit binding, this to a disjoin. But I want to call this greeting function in the context of this particular user object. Listen to the English carefully. I want to call this greeting function in the context of this user object. So it means I have to somehow relate user object to this keyword over here. Now, for this two disjoint thing where they are not at all related, and you want to refer this keyword to another external object completely, you will take help of an explicit binding, and you can do this explicit binding in either of these three methods, either call, apply, or bind. Let's see them one by one. First, the call. So to use call, how you have to do it, the function which is having this keyword, and you want to refer this keyword to any of the external object, you will be taking that function name first, call greeting, and then you will call a method. The method name is call itself, is JavaScript what it provides, and this takes that object that you want to bind to. So here the object is user is what I can pass. What will happen in this case? In this case, JavaScript will bind this user object to this keyword that is used inside this greeting function. This greeting function we have used over here. Okay, this is an example of an explicit binding using the call function, through which we are able to associate this user object to this keyword of this method by invoking the call function and passing this user object. So now this greeting function will be executed. Here the greeting function will be called using this context of user object, and this will resolve to this user object. So it will find user.name as tapaScript. Hello tapaScript belongs to this dot address will resolve to all of you. Hello tapaScript belongs to all of you. I can see the output over here. Hello tapaScript belongs to all of you. This is how the explicit binding using the call works. Now it's not only this, the call function can be enhanced further. For example, here the greeting function is not taking any argument, not taking any parameter. What if it takes a parameter? So you should have a way to pass the parameter over here as well, right? So let's take one more example of call where we can pass certain parameters. Let's take a function, okay? Let's take a function called const likes equals to a function, and here I have say hobby1 comma hobby2, and inside this again I'm doing console dot log this dot name likes hobby1 hobby2. Okay, now let's define one object, standalone detached object called person, and it has a name attribute. Let's give the value as tapas. I want to refer this from this function likes function to this particular object. You know how to do it, because to a disjoint thing I can use the explicit binding concept using the call function. So what I'll do the function name likes dot call and then pass the object person that I want to associate. So now when the likes method gets called over here using this call, of course this keyword will resolve to this person object because I am passing it over here. So this dot name will be resolved to tapas. So console.log tapas likes. Now hobby1 hobby2 I have to pass. If I have to pass hobby1 hobby2, I can just pass it right after passing this object. So I can say over here that tapas like teaching, tapas like blogging. So now hobby1 parameter will be mapped with this teaching argument, hobby2 will be mapped with this blogging argument. So when this function gets executed for this call, the person object is nothing but this keyword's value. So this is referring to the person object. Hobby1's value is teaching and hobby2's value is blogging. So now this dot name tapas likes teaching comma blogging. This is what I'm going to see as an output. Tapas likes teaching comma blogging. Excellent. So I hope that the usage of the call function for explicit binding is clear to you. Now let's understand the apply function. Have you noticed any problem with the call function? There is one problem with the call function. What it is? The number of arguments I am passing with the comma separated way. So if there are like 7 arguments, that means I need 7 parameters over here. I need 7 arguments comma separated way over here. That's too much to have, isn't it? But what I can do, instead of doing all this thing, I can create an array, say const hobbies to bind equals to, let's take two different hobbies inside an array. One is say sleeping is somebody's hobby, and say eating, another hobby. Now, instead of doing this call, what I can do, I can invoke this likes function using another method called apply, pass the same object that I want this to refer to, person object. Instead of passing this argument one by one, I can pass all the argument as an array. That is the advantage. Maybe I can name it as hobbies to apply, because we are now talking about the apply method. I don't want you to be confused with the bind method now. That will be next. So the difference between a call and an apply is, for call, if you have to pass the argument, you have to pass the argument in a comma separated way. But for apply, you can pass all the argument as an array together like this. So code is much, much simpler. Rest of the things are exactly same. To refer this keyword to an object while calling this method or while invoking this method, you have to pass the object, and then respectively we'll call the apply or the call function on the function itself. So call and apply are the function on JavaScript functions. JavaScript function has inbuilt function called call and apply that takes an object that you want to associate to the this keyword that is used inside this function, and additionally you can pass the arguments. Okay, so that is the one. Now the last thing is about the bind method. Let's learn about that also. For bind method, the only difference that it has with the call and bind method, in case of call, what we have seen, the moment in this line number 121, we have done this function dot call, passing whatever is required. The function will be executed immediately and it will give me the result after the execution of this particular function. We have learned that. But in case of bind, it is little bit different. In case of bind, it won't give you the result of the execution of the function on which you are calling the bind. Rather, it will return you a completely new function that you can execute later point of time to get the desired output. Too much to hold in the memory. Let's see and understand by example. So to understand bind, let's create another function. The function name is new hobbies, and it's a simple function that takes like previous function only. Hobby1, hobby2, do a console.log of this.name likes hobby1, hobby2. And let's take an object, a standalone object called officer. An officer is having a name called Bob. Now I want to invoke this function new hobbies, and while invoking, I want to refer this keyword to this particular object. If you have to do this with the call, how will you do? Very easily you will do. You will do like new hobbies dot call, and then you will pass the officer, and then we'll pass officer's two hobbies, say dancing, and maybe the second one would be singing. These two hobbies you have passed. Now this will give you Bob likes dancing and singing. You got Bob likes dancing and singing. That's great. Now with the bind method, the changes that it will bring, if you do a bind method, it is not going to execute this particular function straight away. It is not going to execute new hobby straight away. Rather, it is going to return you a new function, const new fn, and then this function you can execute. Basically, it is going to return this same function, this function, and that function you are holding inside this new fn variable. And then this new fn you can execute any point in time to get the desired output. Now, if I see, I'll see the same output in this case also. Bob's like dancing and singing. So when you will use what? Very simple. When you want the function to be executed then and there to get the desired output, where you want to associate the this to an object, you will be using call. You won't be using bind. But you don't want to execute it over here. You want to execute it on a later point of time. The advantage over here, if you use bind, the new fn you can hold over here, and maybe based on certain conditions, based on certain values, certain circumstances, later point in time, you can invoke it. And you can only do it if you're using the bind. If you're using call, it will be executed then and there. If you use bind, it will give you a function that you can use later point in time. So I hope that all these explicit binding using call, apply, and bind is crystal clear to you. So hey guys, we have learned this, right? Do you remember the object creation using this function? We have learned this in the object session, in the last session, day 12. So here we have also used a keyword called new to create different instances or the objects, right? So for example, from this cartoon function, if I have to now, we also call it as a constructor function, create an object, a cartoon object, say const tom cartoon equals to, we use the new keyword and the function name also starts with the capital letter. You know that. Okay, instead of var, I don't like to use var, let's use const. And here I'll be doing new cartoon, and then I'll be passing Tom is the name, and what kind of animal is Tom? Tom is a cat. So I have the Tom cartoon. Now next I'll be doing another one called Jerry cartoon, and I can do new again cartoon so that I can create another object, and here name I'll pass as Jerry, and of course Jerry is a rat or a mouse. So Tom cartoon is an object which now has a name, which has a value called Tom, animal, which has a value called cat, and a method called log. If you have hard time understanding this constructor function, I'll request you to go over the last video where I have explained the constructor function in details so that you get a grip on it. That's the whole reason I have explained object first before the this keyword. That's how you do the mental mapping in understanding JavaScript concepts. So now I can invoke Tom cartoon dot log. I can do that, right? The moment I do that, the Tom cartoon dot log, now this keyword inside this log function will be associated to the Tom cartoon, just like our implicit binding. So here I'm showing this just to explain that when you are creating object using the new keyword from the constructor function, in that case also, when you're calling a method and if the method is having the this keyword, the this keyword will refer to the object on which you are calling the method. So here the log will print this dot name means Tom cartoon's instance name, which is like the Tom that you have passed over here. So Tom is a animal, will be this cat. Tom is a cat. And if I do the same thing with Jerry, so in this case, the log, this will refer to the Jerry cartoon object. So this dot name will be the name that you passed here while constructing this particular object was Jerry, and the animal will be the mouse, you pass that. So Jerry is a mouse. So first one is a Tom is a cat, then Jerry is a mouse. You see that Tom is a cat, Jerry is a mouse. So guys, that's all about the this keyword. A quick recap: this keyword in the global scope, this keyword inside standalone function, this keyword inside standalone function using the strict mode, this keyword with the implicit binding in object method, this keyword in the arrow function, this keyword in the arrow function that is within another function scope or object, then this keyword with the explicit binding with call, apply, bind, this keyword with object that's created using the new keyword. So many different places this keyword really changes its behavior and the characteristic in a different way, but these are the only place, and for each of the place I told you the rule. One of the primary tasks you will find in the task section is like for you to create a table with a row and column, one column with the situation and another column how this behave. So every situation that you have learned in this video, you have to create, you have to write the situation, say global. In the global, what is the value of the this keyword? Then inside standalone function, what is the value of the this keyword? Inside the object method, what is the value of this keyword? For explicit, what is the value of this keyword? Everything you have to write, create this particular table for you, share it on our Discord so that I can check it, validate that you have understood it correctly, and also keep it for your progress tracking. Before I finish, I want to request you that you go through all the tasks that are given in this session, very, very important, so that once you're able to solve it, you will feel like that, oh, I have learned finally the this keyword really well. But let me help you with 2 such tasks so that you get to build a mental model on how to target those tasks for yourself when you are trying it out. And once you happen to finish those tasks, don't forget to come to Discord and share about it, because that's how we all learn. And if you have any questions, please post in the comment. Let me clarify to you. Let me come back to you with the answer. Okay, so 2 things, 2 examples, 2 tricky questions let us solve before we end this. What will be the output of this program, this particular code snippet? Let me explain. There is an user object. There is a property called name with value tapas. There is another property called greet as a method. Basically, this is the function. Inside this function, there is another inner function, and I'm not returning anything from here. I'm just invoking this inner function over here. And what I'm doing over here, I'm doing user.greet. This greet function is what I'm calling, this one. So once the greet function is getting called, what will happen? Very straightforward. It will first define this inner function and then call this inner function. When it's called this inner function, this console.log will be executed. So it is going to print hello $this.name. Now here question is, what will be the output? Will it be hello tapas, or it will be like hello undefined, something like that? So it all boils down to what is this is resolving to. Is this resolving to this particular user object, or it is resolving to something else? What do you think the output will be? I have given you tasks like this only. So you have to understand how to think about it with all the things that we have learned. That is why I'm doing this exercise with you, so that when you do the exercise, your mental model is very clear. Let's see the output first. Output is like hello and then blank, possibly an undefined. So it means for sure it has not print hello tapas. $this.name hasn't resolved to tapas, means this has not resolved to the user object. This is what is the output. But let's explain why it is and try to fix this. We want to print it hello tapas. Now, with all our logic that we have learned so far. Okay, now let's go by the rules. Greet is a method. This is a regular function. So if this is a regular function, and if this function, instead of having these lines, just had console.log of this.name, this keyword would have resolved to user, because that's our implicit binding. We have learned that, right? So in this case, even I'm calling user.greet, here this will resolve to the user as part of the implicit binding rule. So that's why it is giving tapas. But our case is a bit different. We are not using the this keyword in this top level method itself. Rather, inside this, we have another function. We are executing this function, and inside this function we had the this keyword, right? That is how the code is. Now, as this is another function, okay, inside the method there is another function, and you are executing this function. Our rule says that when your this is used inside a standalone function, which is not a object method. What is an object method? From here to here is an object method, because this is the value of an object's property. Please understand the way we have learned. When an object's property having a value which is a function, that is the one is called as a method. Okay. But inside the method, you have a standalone function, and you have used this keyword inside this standalone function, which will point to what? Which will point to the window object if you are running in the non-strict mode. If I am putting use strict at the top of it, it will be undefined. So that's why I am getting this particular thing over here. We are not getting it printed tapas. Now I know why it is not happening. Now the second thing for me is like, how am I going to fix it? Now to fix it, very simple thing is, what if this particular inner function, instead of a standalone normal function, I convert this to an arrow function? What will happen? If I convert this to an arrow function, let's convert this to an arrow function. Const inner equals to here arrow symbol. Now it's an arrow function. Now what will happen? What is the rule of arrow function? Wherever the arrow function is lexically placed it here. Arrow function doesn't have its own this. It will always look into its parent scope. Parent scope means what is arrow function scope now? Arrow function scope is this particular function, because this arrow function is lexically defined inside this function. So what is arrow function's parent? Arrow function parent scope is this particular block, because in this block arrow function is defined. So its parent will be this particular block. That means that this inside the arrow function will point to this particular scope, which is the user object. So at this is now resolved to user object, this dot name will be resolved to Tapas. Now it will print hello Tapas. So just by changing the inner function, standalone non-arrow function to an arrow function, we could fix this issue. Now, are you understanding why arrow function is brought into JavaScript? It is not just for simplifying your syntax. It is to fix many things. The way you used to do is like very much roundabout way. Now it is very straightforward. The function is existing in JavaScript for decades. The kind of problem that people used to have with that inner function inside a method was huge. But now, just by converting the inner function to an arrow function, taking advantage of its lexical scoping and how this points to the parent scope, we are able to solve this problem. We are able to fix this bug. Now use.greet is going to say hello Tapas. You see the output over here. Let's take one more. Okay. So here, very straightforward. I have an object. I have a property called name, value John. Greet is a method and it has a console.log. Now I am doing obj.greet over here. Greet is nothing but this guy. But I am not executing this function over here. If I had given like this, the function will be executed here itself. The method will be executed here itself. And it would have done that implicit binding and it would have given me a console.log. But I am not executing over here. I'm just calling it. Now, if you do obj.greet, it is going to return you this function. So I'm taking that function inside this variable and later point in time, I am just executing this. Now, what will be the output? Are you expecting hello John or you're expecting something else? Let's see. Again, it is coming hello blank. Hello John is not coming. So there is a problem. Now, if I have to do hello John, what changes I'll be doing over here? Or rather, why it is not showing hello John? Again, another interview question. You can go cool-headed and answer this one very easily with all the things that we have learned with this. Let's understand. If I have done this obj.greet, it would have been an implicit binding, right? Greet, is it a method? Yes, sir, it's a method. Is it a standalone non-arrow method? Yes, sir, it's a standalone non-arrow method. Great. Does it have this? Yes, it has this. So this will resolve to the object on which we have invoked this method, implicit binding rule. So this will be here John. So it will be hello John. Hello John. Fair enough. We understand this one by now. But the problem here, the code is a bit different. Code is like this. Now this greet is returning a function. That function I'm holding over here. Now you have to answer this question. When I'm invoking this function at the line number 25, at this invocation, line number 25, this greet fn is a function that is getting executed in the global execution context, isn't it? This function is getting executed in the global execution context, and this function is completely detached from this object. If we have done object.greet, here only we are executing means it is already attached to this object, but not executing over here, returning it here and then executing later point in time, whether it's line number 25 or if something and then over here line number 27, whatever it is. Whenever I'm executing over here, I don't have any context of this obj at all. That means this cannot be referring to this obj at all. How can we fix this? Now, for this purpose, we have learned the concept of explicit binding. When those two things are not attached, but you want to attach a function to an object, what you can do? You can do it using the explicit binding. For explicit binding, what you have? You have call, apply, and bind. So you can do a call on this particular greetfn, and now you can pass your this object obj so that your obj object is now referring to the this keyword used inside this greetfn. Correct? Inside this greetfn, if I just don't call it even over here, if I do console.log of greetfn, and if I see the output, greetfn is this function which is having hello dollar this name. Now, if I want to associate this keyword with that particular object, I will just have to pass this obj over here. Now what will happen? Now this greetfn function will be called using the context of this obj, so that if there is a this keyword, it will be resolved to this particular obj object. What is the obj object? This is the obj object which is already having a name. So obj.name will be John. It will be hello John. See the output. Now back to hello John. I hope you love solving this problem. So my friends, again a big video, big session, but I hope that it's worth your time that you are spending on it and you learn something new. You learn how to tackle this keyword. Please try out all the tasks. And if you happen to solve all the tasks, please comment that I have solved all the tasks. Kudos to you then. And if you stuck anywhere, come to Discord. Let's discuss it together. Let's learn together. Let us make sure that you learn JavaScript in a way that you win over it. You never ever get scared with JavaScript. See you soon in day 14 with another outstanding topic from JavaScript universe. Stay well, keep learning.